I never thought I'd be starting over at 65. Never imagined I'd be sitting across from my husband of 4 decades at Le Château, watching him hold hands with his 32-year-old secretary while he told me our marriage was over. The crystal chandelier lights reflected off his wedding band, the same platinum ring I'd placed on his finger all those years ago. He hadn't even bothered to remove it yet. "Diana," Robert said, his voice practiced and calm as though delivering a quarterly report to shareholders. "Natalie and I have developed feelings for each other. I want a divorce." Our 40th anniversary dinner, that's when he chose to tell me. I'd spent 2 hours getting ready, visited the salon for the first time in months, wore the pearl earrings he'd given me on our 30th, and there she sat, Natalie Chen, poised in a black dress that probably cost more than our first apartment's monthly rent, her manicured hand resting on his, a small smile playing at the corners of her glossy lips. "I thought it would be best to do this somewhere public," Robert continued when I didn't respond, "so things wouldn't get emotional." The waiter approached with champagne, the Dom Perignon I'd watched Robert order while I was still walking, to the table, still unaware my life was about to implode. "Shall I pour, sir?" he asked, oblivious to the tension. "Yes, please," Robert nodded. "We're celebrating." That's when something inside me, something that had been bending and accommodating for 40 years, finally snapped. I stood up, my chair scraping loudly against the hardwood floor. The neighboring tables glanced over, curious. I grabbed the champagne bottle by its neck before the waiter could pour. "You're right about one thing, Robert," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "We are celebrating." And I walked out, Dom Perignon in hand, leaving my husband and his secretary sitting in stunned silence as whispers rippled through the restaurant. It wasn't until I reached my car that the tears came. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Diana Mitchell, or it was Diana Adams before. I married Robert. For 40 years, I'd been Mrs. Robert Mitchell, wife of the founder and CEO of Mitchell Media Group, one of Seattle's most successful advertising agencies. That was my identity, the core of my introduction at every business dinner, every charity gala, every country club brunch. Meet Robert's wife, Diana. Never. Meet Diana Mitchell, co-founder of Mitchell Media Group. Never that. I drove home from Le Château in a daze, the unopened champagne bottle rolling on the passenger seat beside me. Our house, a 4-bedroom craftsman overlooking Lake Washington, was dark when I arrived. I'd left lights on when I'd departed, excited for our anniversary dinner, but now they were off. Already, it felt less like home. Inside, I noticed immediately. Little things, Natalie's touches, a different potpourri in the entryway, a sleek new coffee maker I didn't recognize on the counter, Robert's favorite scotch missing from the bar cart. I walked through each room slowly, cataloging the subtle changes, the gradual invasion that had happened right under my nose. In our bedroom, my bedroom, I opened Robert's closet, half empty. Of course. He'd been moving out gradually, so I wouldn't notice, wouldn't make a fuss. Robert hated fuss. I sat on the edge of our bed, still clutching the champagne bottle, and tried to make sense of what had happened. 40 years of marriage, 2 children, now adults with their own families, a business we'd built from nothing, all discarded for a woman barely older than our daughter. The champagne bottle felt cold against my palms. With sudden decisiveness, I walked to the master bathroom, twisted off the wire cage, and popped the cork. It hit the ceiling with a dull thud, champagne foaming over my hands. I didn't bother with a glass, just tilted the bottle and took a long swallow. In the mirror, a stranger stared back at me. A 65-year-old woman with carefully highlighted hair, crow's feet she'd tried to minimize with expensive creams. A body kept trim through decades of disciplined diet and exercise because Robert liked her to make an effort. A woman who'd spent her entire adult life being what someone else wanted. The champagne burned going down. "Happy anniversary to me," I whispered to my reflection. My phone buzzed in my purse. A text from our daughter, Megan. "How was the big dinner? Did Dad love the watch?" The watch. I'd forgotten about the watch. A vintage Rolex I'd spent months hunting down, similar to the one Robert's father had owned. It was still in my purse, gift-wrapped in his favorite navy. Blue paper. I didn't respond to Megan. Couldn't find the words yet. Instead, I carried the champagne to the home office, the room where Mitchell Media Group had been born 4 decades earlier. The office was technically ours, but over the years, it had become predominantly Robert's domain. His industry awards lined the bookshelves. His business books filled the built-ins. His leather chair sat behind the massive oak desk. But the filing cabinet in the corner, that was mine. I'd kept everything. Every document, every contract, every financial statement since we'd started the company in 1983. Robert had always teased me about it, Diana and her paper trail, but I'd insisted. "Someday we might need these," I'd said. I hadn't known then just how right I would be. Taking another swig of champagne, I unlocked the bottom drawer of the filing cabinet, the one with the oldest documents, and began to dig. I found it in a faded manila folder labeled Incorporation Docs, 1983. The original paperwork for Mitchell Media Group, filled out in my neat handwriting because Robert had said mine was more legible. I spread the documents across the desk, scanning through incorporation articles, partnership agreements, and initial investment records. And there it was, on page 3 of the ownership structure. Diana Adams Mitchell, 55% ownership, Robert James. Mitchell, 45% ownership. I blinked, certain I was misreading. I took another look, running my finger across the percentages. It was clear as day. I remembered now. We'd put the majority share in my name because I'd contributed more startup capital, liquidating a small inheritance from my grandmother, while Robert had contributed sweat equity and client connections from his previous employer. It had seemed like a technicality at the time, something our lawyer had suggested for the initial paperwork. Over the years, as Robert became the face of the company, as I stepped back to raise our children and support his ambitions, we'd both forgotten this fundamental fact. Or rather, I had forgotten. Looking at the dates of financial statements and transfer documents, I realized with growing certainty that Robert had remembered and had been trying for years to quietly restructure without explicitly addressing the original ownership division. But he'd never succeeded. Through all the company's growth, all the restructuring and expansion, the fundamental ownership percentages had remained unchanged. I still owned the controlling interest in Mitchell Media Group. The company that bore my husband's name was, legally, mine. I sat back in Robert's leather chair, champagne forgotten as the implications washed over me. For decades, I'd believed the narrative that Robert had constructed, that he was the business genius, the visionary who had built Mitchell Media from nothing, that my role had been supportive but secondary, critical perhaps, but not central. The documents told a different story. Not only had I provided the majority of the initial capital, but my signature appeared on every major decision in the company's early years. I'd been fully involved, attending client meetings, developing campaign strategies, managing the books, until our first child was born and priorities shifted. The shift had been gradual. First, I'd stopped attending external client meetings. Then, I'd moved from strategy to operations, working behind the scenes while Robert became more prominent. By the time our second child arrived, I was working part-time, focusing on internal systems while raising our family. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, my contributions had been minimized, my role reduced in the company narrative, until I was just Robert's wife. Anger rose in me, not just at Robert, but At myself. I had allowed this erasure. I had stepped back, convinced by Robert and societal expectations that my primary value was in supporting his success, in creating a perfect home and family that would enable his genius to flourish. I had bought into the idea that his ambition was somehow more legitimate, more worthy than mine. The champagne bottle was almost empty now. I drained the last drops and set it on the desk with a heavy thud. Outside the office window, the waters of Lake Washington reflected the moon's glow. The same view I'd admired for 20 years since we'd bought this house. Robert's dream house, paid for by the success of our company. My company. I gathered the incorporation documents and slipped them into my purse, alongside the unwrapped Rolex. Then I pulled out my phone, and for the first time in our 40-year marriage, I did something I'd never done before. I called a lawyer who wasn't on Robert's approved list. Sarah Lancaster had represented my friend Judith through a brutal divorce last year. Judith had emerged with her dignity and financial security intact. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Despite her ex-husband's considerable resources and ruthless tactics, I'd saved Sarah's number then, though I'd never imagined I'd use it. It was after 10 p.m., but I dialed anyway, leaving a voicemail requesting the earliest possible appointment. Then I texted our daughter back. Dinner ended early. We'll talk tomorrow. I couldn't sleep in our bed that night. Instead, I moved to the guest room, stripping off my anniversary outfit and pulling on an old Yale t-shirt from my college days, before I'd met Robert, when I'd been Diana Adams with a business degree and big plans of my own. Morning came with harsh clarity. I made coffee in my own kitchen, feeling like a stranger in a space I'd designed. Every decorative choice suddenly seemed like a capitulation. The neutral palette Robert preferred, the uncomfortable but aesthetically pleasing, chairs he'd insisted on, the absence of family photos because they cluttered the clean lines. My phone rang at 8 a.m. sharp, Sarah Lancaster herself returning my call. Mrs. Mitchell, I got your message. I have an opening at 10 if you can make it downtown. 2 hours later, I sat in Sarah's office on the 34th floor of a downtown Seattle high-rise. The original incorporation document spread across her desk. She was younger than I'd expected, maybe early 40s, with a sharp bob and sharper eyes that missed nothing. These are clear, she said after reviewing everything. You own controlling interest in Mitchell Media Group and have since its inception. Your husband cannot sell, merge, or substantially alter the company without your approval. She looked up, those keen eyes assessing me. Has he been trying to? I hesitated, the events of the past few months suddenly clicking into place. He's been talking about a merger with Apex Digital. Said it would be his legacy move before retirement. I thought he was just keeping me informed. Now I realize he was laying groundwork. Sarah nodded, making notes. And the divorce announcement came after you didn't immediately support this merger? I didn't oppose it either. I just asked questions. About what would happen to our employees. About whether the company culture would survive. I closed my eyes briefly, remembering Robert's irritation at my questions during a dinner with the Apex executives last month. He brought Natalie to that meeting. His secretary said she was taking notes. And now he wants to marry her. Sarah's voice was neutral, but her expression conveyed understanding. I nodded, a lump forming in my throat despite my determination to remain composed. 40 years. We celebrated our anniversary last night. Or that was the plan. Instead, he told me he wanted a divorce, with her sitting right there. Sarah set down her pen, her professional demeanor softening slightly. Mrs. Mitchell, may I call you Diana? In my experience, men like your husband don't make these decisions suddenly. This has likely been in planning for some time. The merger or the divorce? Both. They're almost certainly connected. She pulled out a legal pad. Let's talk strategy. What do you want? The question caught me off guard. What did I want? For 40 years, what I wanted had taken a back seat to what Robert wanted, what our children needed, what the business required. My wants had become so secondary that I struggled to identify them. I don't want to be erased, I said finally, surprised by the firmness in my voice. From the company or from our life together, I don't want to be pushed aside as if I never mattered. Sarah nodded, continuing to make notes. And the company? Do you want to maintain your controlling interest? Did I? The question gave me pause. For years, I'd been distanced from day-to-day operations, my role largely ceremonial. But the thought of Robert merging our company, the company we'd built from our apartment dining table, with Apex Digital, known for their aggressive cost-cutting and mass layoffs after acquisitions. The thought of the Mitchell Media family being dismantled so Robert could cash out with his young girlfriend. Yes, I said, finding clarity in the moment. I want to protect what we built, what I built. Good. Sarah set down her pen. Then here's what we're going to do. Over the next hour, we outlined a plan, not just for the divorce proceedings, but for reasserting my position within Mitchell Media Group. The first step would be an emergency meeting with the company's board of directors, where I would formally establish my controlling interest. Won't they already know? I asked. Surely someone must have read the original paperwork. Sarah's smile was knowing. You'd be surprised how often these details get overlooked, especially when someone as charismatic as your husband is telling a different story. My guess is that most of the board members have no idea you're the majority owner. As I left Sarah's office, my phone buzzed with a text from Robert. Where are you? We need to talk about how to handle this with the kids and the company. Dinner. Tonight at Sullivan's, 7 p.m. The presumption in his message, that I would simply show up, that we would coordinate our stories, that I would help make his betrayal more palatable to our children and colleagues, ignited a fresh wave of anger. For the first time in our relationship, I didn't immediately respond to accommodate his plans. Instead, I texted our children directly. Megan, Tyler, I need to see you both. Lunch at my house today if possible. Important family matter. They responded quickly, both concerned, both able to make it. Megan asked if everything was okay. Tyler asked if Dad would be there. I answered neither question. On my way home, I stopped at the grocery store, buying ingredients for a proper lunch. I'd spent countless hours preparing meals for my family over the decades, always attentive to Robert's preferences and restrictions. Today, I bought what I wanted: crusty sourdough bread from the local bakery, ripe tomatoes, thick-cut bacon. I would make BLTs, Tyler's favorite from childhood, and something Robert had always dismissed as too messy. By noon, I had sandwiches prepared, a simple salad dressed, and iced tea brewing on the counter. The house felt different in daylight, less a museum to Robert's taste, more clearly a space where I had lived and raised our family. Evidence of my existence was everywhere if I looked properly. The herbs growing on the kitchen windowsill, the children's height marks penciled inside the pantry door, the collection of hand-thrown pottery mugs I'd acquired over years of supporting local artisans. Megan arrived first, letting herself in with her key. At 38, she was successful in her own right, a pediatric surgeon, married with twin boys. She looked more like me than Robert, with the same dark hair and questioning eyes. "Mom," she called, setting down her purse on the entryway. Table. "What's going on? You sounded serious." Tyler arrived minutes later, still in workout clothes from his morning run. At 35, he was the image of his father, tall, broad-shouldered, with the same confident stride. He ran a boutique investment firm downtown, having rejected Robert's persistent attempts to bring him into Mitchell Media. "Where's the fire?" he asked, kissing my cheek. Then, noting the spread on the dining table, "BLTs? Now I know something's up. Dad would never allow this much bacon in the house. Your father isn't living here anymore," I said. the words coming out before I could soften them. Tyler froze halfway into a chair. Megan's hand, reaching for her water glass, stilled in midair. "What?" they said in unison. I sat down, motioning for them to do the same. "Your father told me last night at our anniversary dinner that he wants a divorce. He's been seeing his secretary, Natalie. She was there when he told me." Stunned silence followed. Then a barrage of questions, overlapping as they both tried to process the information. "How long has this been going on? Where is he staying? Are you okay? Did you have any idea?" I answered what I could, surprised by my own composure. No, I hadn't suspected, though in retrospect there had been signs. Yes, he'd been moving things out gradually. No, I wasn't okay, but I would be. "I can't believe he did this to you," Megan said finally, her initial shock giving way to anger. "On your anniversary, after 40 years. Tyler was quieter, his expression troubled. "Natalie Chen, the one he brought to the Christmas party, she's like my age." 32, I confirmed. "And apparently the new love of his life." "This is midlife crisis bullshit," Megan declared. "Except he's too old for a midlife crisis." "What is this? A 3/4 life crisis?" Despite everything, I laughed, a rusty sound I barely recognized. When had I last truly laughed? "There's more," I said, sobering. "About the company." I explained what I'd discovered about the ownership structure of Mitchell Media Group, showing them the documents. As they read, their expressions shifted, from confusion to disbelief to something like awe. "Mom," Tyler said slowly, "you own the company Dad's been taking credit for all these years?" "We built it together," I corrected automatically, the habit of minimizing my contributions deeply ingrained. Then I caught myself. "But yes, legally, I own the controlling interest." "Holy shit," Megan whispered, an exclamation I'd never heard from my typically composed daughter. "Does Dad know you know this?" "Not yet." I took a bite of my sandwich, savoring the combination of flavors, the salty bacon, the ripe tomato, the tang of good mayonnaise. "He wants to meet tonight to discuss how we'll present the divorce to you and to the company. I suspect he has a narrative already prepared. One that makes him look noble and you look pathetic," Tyler said, his tone bitter. He'd always been more clear-eyed about his father's manipulative tendencies than his sister. "And one that paves the way for this merger he's been pushing," I added, "with Apex Digital." Megan's head snapped up. "The Vulture Capital firm? The ones who gutted Rivera Communications last year? Dad wants to sell to them?" I nodded. "He's been laying the groundwork for months. I think the divorce announcement was timed to push me aside before the deal goes through. He probably assumes I'll retreat quietly, take a settlement, and let him proceed." "But you're not going to," Tyler said. It wasn't a question. I met my son's gaze, seeing in him the strength I'd always attributed to Robert but now recognized came as much from my side. "No, I'm not." After lunch, after my children had left with promises of support and a barrage of texts checking on me, I returned to the home office. The space felt different now, less intimidating, more familiar. I ran my fingers over the spines of business books on the shelves, realizing I'd read most of them too, often before Robert, marking passages I thought would interest him. On the wall hung framed press clippings chronicling Mitchell Media's rise. Robert accepting awards, Robert shaking hands with prominent clients, Robert cutting ribbons at office expansions. I studied the photographs more carefully than I had in years, noticing how often I appeared in the background, slightly out of focus, partially cropped, the supportive wife just visible at the edge of the frame. Fitting, I thought. Present but peripheral. Essential but unacknowledged. I opened my laptop, a sleek MacBook I used primarily for personal emails and occasional remote work for the agency. My Mitchell Media email account had grown neglected over the past few years, as Robert had gradually excluded me from operational communications. Logging in, I was surprised to find a recent email from Daphne Rivera, the former CEO of Rivera Communications, the company Megan had mentioned, gutted by Apex Digital after acquisition. The subject line read simply, "Warning." I opened it with growing unease. "Diana, we haven't spoken since the Seattle Ad Council dinner last year, but I felt compelled to reach out. I've heard rumors that Mitchell Media is in talks with Apex. Before you proceed, we should talk. What happened to Rivera wasn't a standard acquisition. Call me if you want the full story. Daphne." The email was dated 3 weeks ago. I'd never seen it. With a growing sense of dread, I checked the email. Settings. My account had been set up with a filter directing all business correspondence to a folder I'd never known existed. Hundreds of emails from clients, partners, and industry contacts, all neatly filtered away from my view. Robert had been systematically isolating me from company information while maintaining the illusion that I was simply losing interest. My hands shook as I dialed Daphne's number. She answered on the second ring. "Diana Mitchell," she said, surprise evident in her voice. "I honestly didn't expect to hear from you." "I just saw your email," I explained. "There was a technical issue with my account." "A technical issue named Robert?" Her tone was knowing. "Listen, Diana, I don't have much time, but here's what you need to know. Apex's whole acquisition strategy hinges on getting controlling partners to agree to terms before minority stakeholders can organize. In our case, they offered my ex-husband an executive position and a golden parachute to convince me it was a good deal. 3 months after the papers were signed, half our staff was laid off, and my former partner had a new title, a corner office, and none of the decision-making power he was promised. My stomach clenched. "And you?" "A generous retirement package and a non-disparagement clause that I'm probably violating by having this conversation." Daphne's laugh was brittle. "Dyeworth Agency is next on their list, by the way. Then you. They're working their way through the independent agencies in Seattle like a virus." After thanking Daphne and promising to keep her warning confidential, I sat in the growing darkness of the home office, pieces clicking into place. Robert's sudden interest in retirement planning, his casual mentions of how nice it would be to have liquidity for our golden years, his irritation when I'd asked about employee protections in the potential Apex deal. My phone lit up with a text from Robert. "I already made reservations. Sullivan's at 7. Don't be late." I stared at the message, imagining the scene he'd planned. A quiet corner table, perhaps a martini already waiting for me, my usual order that he'd place without asking. He'd be prepared with a settlement offer that would seem generous to outsiders, but would leave him with the company and the legacy. He'd expect me to cry, to plead, to eventually acquiesce because that's what I'd always done. I texted back 3 words, "I'll be there." Then I called Sarah Lancaster. The meeting with Sarah Lancaster had given me clarity, but walking into Sullivan's that evening still required every ounce of courage I possessed. I'd changed into a sleek black pantsuit, not one Robert had selected for me, but one I'd purchased on a rare shopping trip with my friend Judith. Robert had dismissed it as too severe, which was precisely why I chose it tonight. Sullivan's was crowded with the usual Thursday evening crowd, business executives, tech professionals, the occasional celebrity from Seattle's art scene. The maitre d' recognized me immediately. "Mrs. Mitchell, lovely to see you. Mr. Mitchell is already seated." He guided me through the dimly lit restaurant to a secluded corner table. Just as I'd predicted, Robert was waiting with a martini already placed at my seat. 2 olives, extra dry. "Diana." He stood as I approached, ever the gentleman in public. "Thank you for coming." I didn't take the chair he pulled out for me. Instead, selecting one that put my back to the wall, facing the restaurant. I wanted to see everyone, and I wanted everyone to see me. "Robert," I said, my voice cool. "You're looking well." He was. He'd clearly taken time to prepare for this meeting. Fresh haircut, new tie, his favorite charcoal suit that emphasized his still athletic build. A man in his prime, not someone nearing 70. "You haven't returned my calls," he said, frowning, slightly. "We need to discuss how to handle this situation." I took a sip of the martini. "Which situation would that be? Our divorce? Your affair with your secretary? Or the fact that you're planning to sell Mitchell Media to Apex Digital without consulting the majority owner?" The flash of shock in his eyes was worth every moment of the pain I'd endured. He recovered quickly, leaning forward, his voice dropping. "Diana, you're upset. Understandably so. But let's not complicate matters by dragging the company into our personal issues." "That's an interesting perspective," I replied, setting down my glass. "Considering you've spent 40 years treating our company as exclusively yours." "Our company?" His tone was patronizing. "Diana, you haven't been involved in daily operations for decades. You attend the holiday party and occasionally host a client dinner. That hardly makes you the majority shareholder?" I finished for him, opening my purse and placing the incorporation documents on the table between us. "Because that's what I am, Robert. And what I've always been, since 1983. His expression shifted from condescension to confusion as he reached for the papers. I watched as he scanned them, his brow furrowing, then his face paling as recognition dawned. "These are the original incorporation documents for Mitchell Media Group," I confirmed, "establishing me as 55% owner and you as 45%. Never legally changed, despite whatever you might have led the board or yourself to believe." Robert's hands trembled slightly as he set the papers down. He glanced around the restaurant, then leaned closer, his voice urgent. "Diana, be reasonable. This was a technicality, a quirk of the initial paperwork. We both know the company is ours or just yours," I interrupted. "Because for decades you've been telling everyone, including me, that Mitchell Media is your legacy, your creation, your achievement. You've accepted awards without mentioning me, given interviews crediting your vision alone, named the company. After yourself, though the startup money came from my inheritance." His jaw tightened. "I built that company into what it is today. With my money, my support, my sacrifice." I held his gaze steadily. "And now you want to sell it to Apex Digital, so you can retire with your secretary, without any consideration for the employees who've been loyal to us for decades. The Apex deal is a good one," he insisted, his business persona reasserting itself. "The valuation is excellent. Everyone comes out ahead. Everyone except the 300 people who will lose their jobs when Apex dismantles the company. Everyone except our clients who trust the Mitchell Media approach. Everyone except me, who you assumed would quietly accept whatever crumbs you offered from the sale of my company." Robert's expression hardened. "You've been talking to someone." "Several someones, actually. Daphne Rivera sends her regards." That name hit him like a physical blow. He sat back, reassessing me as if seeing me for the first time in years. "What do you want?" he asked finally. It was the second time I'd been asked that question today, and my answer had only grown clearer in the hours since my meeting with Sarah. "I want what's mine," I said simply. "The company, my position as majority owner, publicly acknowledged, and a divorce settlement that reflects 40 years of partnership, not whatever generous terms you and your lawyers had planned to offer the poor discarded wife." Robert's laugh was sharp, disbelieving. "You can't run Mitchell Media. You've been out of the industry too long." "I don't need to run it day to day. We have excellent people for that. But I will make the decisions about its future. And my first decision is that there will be no sale to Apex Digital." The server approached to take our order. Robert waved him away impatiently. "This is ridiculous," he hissed once we were alone again. "You're acting out of spite." No, Robert. I'm acting out of responsibility to the company we built, to the employees who trusted us, and to myself. I picked up the documents and returned them to my purse. I've called an emergency board meeting for tomorrow morning at 9. I'll be announcing my position as majority shareholder and my decision regarding the Apex proposal. You're welcome to attend, of course. I stood to leave, but Robert grabbed my wrist. Don't do this, Diana. Please. Let's work something out. For a moment, I saw a flicker of the young man I'd fallen in love with. Earnest, ambitious, a dreamer, who needed my practical support to turn visions into reality. But then I remembered the restaurant last night, his hand on Natalie's, the casual cruelty of discarding 40 years of marriage over anniversary champagne. I'll see you at the board meeting, I said, gently removing his hand from my wrist. Oh, and Robert? Don't bother having your security team revoke my access credentials. I've already had them updated as majority owner. I left him sitting alone, at the table, staring at the untouched martini I'd left behind. The night before the board meeting was the longest of my life. I paced the lakeside house that suddenly felt too large, too empty, too filled with choices that hadn't been mine. Sleep proved impossible. Instead, I sat on the deck overlooking the water, wrapped in a cashmere throw, watching the moonlight play across the gentle waves. My phone buzzed repeatedly, texts from Robert growing increasingly desperate, then threatening, then conciliatory. I silenced it without responding. This was a man who had spent decades being in control, who had carefully constructed his narrative of success with himself as the sole protagonist. My assertiveness was an unfamiliar script he didn't know how to counter. As dawn broke over Lake Washington, I made myself a strong cup of coffee and prepared for the day that would change everything. I selected my outfit with care, a deep burgundy suit that I'd purchased for our son's wedding 3 years ago, elegant but powerful, pearl earrings that had been my mother's, low heels that wouldn't compromise my comfort during what promised to be a challenging day. The Mitchell Media offices occupied 3 floors of a gleaming tower in downtown Seattle. I'd helped design the space when we'd moved there 15 years ago, but in recent years, my visits had grown increasingly rare. Still, as I rode the elevator to the executive floor, I was surprised by how familiar it all felt. The subtle scent of the custom fragrance we'd created for the office, the particular quality of light through the west-facing windows, the gentle hum of creative energy. The receptionist, a young woman I didn't recognize, looked up with a professional smile that faltered slightly as she registered who I was. Mrs. Mitchell, we weren't expecting. That is, the board meeting isn't for another hour. I know. Melissa, I said, reading her nameplate. I'd like to review some materials in the conference room beforehand. Her eyes darted to her phone, and I knew Robert had likely instructed her to alert him when I arrived. Let him know, I thought. Let him worry about what I'm preparing. Of course, she said, reaching for her desk phone. I'll have someone show you. I know the way, I interrupted gently, but thank you. The main conference room was exactly as I remembered. A long mahogany table surrounded by ergonomic chairs, one wall entirely glass overlooking the Seattle skyline, the opposite wall bearing the Mitchell Media logo in brushed steel lettering. How many meetings had I sat through in this room, offering suggestions that were attributed to others, watching my role diminish year by year? I set my briefcase on the table and began unpacking the materials Sarah and I had prepared. Copies of the incorporation documents for each board member, a summary of my legal position prepared by Sarah's firm, and a preliminary outline of my vision for Mitchell Media's future, independent of Apex Digital. As I worked, employees began arriving. Through the glass walls of the conference room, I could see their curious glances, their whispered conversations. Many recognized me, of course, but few had seen me in the office recently. Fewer still would have anticipated my presence at what they likely assumed was a routine board meeting. At 8:30, the first board members arrived, Thomas Wilson, our longest-serving member, followed closely by Elaine Martinez and David Kim. Their surprise at finding me already seated at the head of the table was evident, but quickly masked, with professional courtesy. "Diana," Thomas said, extending his hand. "What a pleasant surprise. Robert didn't mention you'd be joining us today." "This is actually my meeting, Thomas," I replied, shaking his hand firmly. "I called it." His eyebrows rose, but before he could respond, the door opened again as the remaining board members filed in, followed finally by Robert. He'd chosen to arrive exactly at 9, making his customary power entrance, only to find the meeting already assembled, already oriented toward me at the head of the table. "What's this?" he demanded, taking in the scene with evident displeasure. "Please take a seat, Robert," I said calmly. "We're about to begin." For a moment, I thought he might refuse, might create a scene. Instead, he slowly lowered himself into a chair midway down the table, not conceding the head position I'd taken, but not directly challenging it either. "Ladies and gentlemen of the board," I began once everyone was seated, "thank you for accommodating this emergency meeting. I've called you together to address a critical matter regarding the ownership and future direction of Mitchell Media Group." I distributed the document folders, watching as each board member opened them with expressions ranging from curiosity to concern. As you can see from the incorporation documents before you, I am and have always been the majority shareholder of Mitchell Media Group, with 55% ownership. These documents have been authenticated by legal counsel, copies of which are included in your packets. The room erupted in murmurs as board members flipped through the pages, some shooting questioning glances at Robert, others studying the documents with growing comprehension. "This is preposterous," Robert interjected, his voice carrying over the murmurs. "A technical oversight from 40 years ago doesn't override decades of operational reality." "Actually, it does," I countered smoothly. "Company law is quite clear on this point. The ownership structure established at incorporation remains legally binding unless formally amended, which these documents never were." Thomas Wilson cleared his throat. "If I may, Diana, why bring this forward now, after all these years?" I met his gaze directly. "Because I've recently learned that negotiations are underway to sell Mitchell Media to Apex Digital. Negotiations conducted without my knowledge or consent as majority owner." More murmurs, louder this time. Several board members looked uncomfortable. "Furthermore," I continued, "I've had discussions with leadership from other agencies acquired by Apex, including Daphne Rivera of Rivera Communications. The picture they paint of Apex's post-acquisition practices is deeply concerning. Mass layoffs, client neglect, and broken promises to original leadership." "This is fear-mongering," Robert cut in, his face flushed. "The Apex deal represents an excellent valuation and ensures Mitchell Media's legacy in a changing market. A legacy of dismantled teams and discarded values is no legacy at all," I replied. "And regardless of your opinion on the matter, Robert, as majority shareholder, I am formally rejecting any acquisition offer from Apex Digital." The tension in the room was palpable. Robert's allies on the board shifted uncomfortably, while others studied me with new interest. "Mrs. Mitchell," began Catherine Walters, our newest board member and the former CMO of a major tech company. "What exactly are your intentions for Mitchell Media going forward?" It was the opening I'd been waiting for. I outlined my vision: maintaining independence, investing in our creative teams, expanding digital offerings while preserving the personalized approach that had distinguished Mitchell Media in an increasingly automated industry. I spoke of valuing institutional knowledge while embracing innovation, of honoring commitments to both employees and clients. As I spoke, I could see the shift happening around the table. Board members who had entered the room seeing me as merely Robert's wife were now engaging with my ideas, asking thoughtful questions, considering the possibilities I presented. Even those aligned with Robert couldn't deny the legal reality of my position or the appeal of my alternative to the Apex acquisition. Robert remained silent through most of this exchange, his expression darkening as he recognized the room slipping from his control. Finally, as the discussion wound down, he made one last attempt. "This is all very inspiring," he said, his tone dismissive. "But Diana has been absent from day-to-day operations for years. She lacks the industry connections, the technical knowledge, the leadership experience to guide Mitchell Media through today's competitive landscape." Before I could respond, Thomas Wilson surprised me by speaking up. "With all due respect, Robert, I've served on this board for 20 years. In the early days, I distinctly remember Diana's contributions to strategy discussions. Her stepping back coincided with raising your children and supporting your career, choices that many women of her generation made. That doesn't negate her capabilities or her legal rights as majority shareholder." Robert's face reddened, but Catherine Walters spoke before he could reply. "I'd add that fresh perspective might be exactly what Mitchell Media needs. The industry is changing rapidly. Perhaps Mrs. Mitchell's distance from day-to-day operations provides valuable objectivity." I nodded gratefully to both of them, then addressed the board once more. "I don't intend to disrupt the excellent work being done by our executive team and employees. I will be taking my rightful seat as chairwoman of the board, but operational leadership will continue under our current management structure." I paused, meeting Robert's gaze directly. With one exception. "Robert, given our personal circumstances and differing visions for the company's future, I believe it would be best if you transitioned to an advisory role." The silence that followed was deafening. Robert stared at me, disbelief giving way to comprehension as he realized what was happening. I wasn't just asserting my legal rights. I was effectively removing him from power in the company he had claimed as his own for decades. "You can't do this," he said, his voice low with fury. "I can and I am," I replied calmly. "The board will vote on this transition at our next regular meeting. Until then, all major decisions, particularly regarding any acquisition talks, are frozen." The meeting concluded shortly after, with board members filing out with thoughtful expressions, several pausing to speak with me privately. Robert remained seated, staring at the folder before him as the room emptied. When we were finally alone, he looked up, his expression a complex mixture of anger and something that might have been respect. "All these years," he said softly, "I never thought you had this in you." "That's because you stopped seeing me, Robert. You saw what you wanted to see, a supportive wife, a silent partner, someone whose contributions could be minimized and eventually erased. You forgot who I was when we started this journey together." He shook his head slowly. "What happens now? Now I reclaim what's mine. My company, my identity, my future. You divorce me and marry Natalie, if that's what you want. But you do it honestly, without taking what doesn't belong to you." I gathered my materials and stood to leave. At the door, I paused, looking back at him. This man I'd loved for 40 years. This stranger I was only now seeing clearly. "One more thing, Robert. The retirement package I'll be offering you is generous. More generous than you'd have been if our positions were reversed. Not because you deserve it, but because I refuse to be diminished by bitterness the way you've been diminished by greed." The word of my revelation spread through Mitchell Media like wildfire. By afternoon, the entire company knew that Mrs. Mitchell, the quiet, elegant woman they rarely saw, was actually the majority owner and now the chairwoman of the board. The Apex acquisition was off. Robert Mitchell would be transitioning to an advisory role. I spent the day meeting with the executive team, reassuring them of their positions, explaining my vision, and listening, truly listening, to their perspectives on the company's strengths and challenges. Many seemed wary at first, uncertain of what my emergence might mean for their careers. But as they realized I wasn't planning a wholesale purge or radical restructuring, just a course correction away from the apex sale, tension visibly eased. Claire Davidson, our creative director and a 20-year veteran of the company, lingered after one such meeting. "I hope this isn't inappropriate," she said hesitantly, "but I want you to know how inspiring this is, especially for the women in the company. Many of us had no idea about your role in founding Mitchell Media." "That's by design, I'm afraid," I replied with a small smile, "though not my design." She nodded thoughtfully. "History is written by those who control the narrative. I'm glad you're reclaiming yours." By evening, exhausted but exhilarated, I returned to the lakeside house. It felt different now. Not the shrine to Robert's success, it had been just days ago, but a space in transition, much like its owner. I kicked off my heels and poured myself a glass of wine, carrying it out to the deck where I'd spent the sleepless night before. The sun was setting over Lake Washington, painting the water in shades of orange and gold. In the distance, boats moved slowly along the horizon, returning to harbor after a day on the water. My phone buzzed with a text from Megan. "Mom, just heard from Dad. Are you okay? Do you want company tonight?" I considered her offer. Part of me craved the comfort of my daughter's presence, the reassurance of family during this upheaval. But another part, a part I was just rediscovering, wanted this moment of solitude, this quiet celebration of having finally stood my ground. "I'm more than okay," I texted back. "Taking some time for myself tonight. Breakfast tomorrow?" Herdy. Response came quickly. "Perfect. So proud of you, Mom." 3 simple words that meant everything. So proud of you. When had anyone last expressed pride in me? When had I last given them reason to? As darkness fell over the lake, I considered the road ahead. The divorce would be complicated, emotionally if not legally, given the clear documentation of my ownership stake in Mitchell Media. Robert wouldn't go quietly. Today's apparent acceptance would likely give way to more calculated resistance once he'd regrouped. The company would face challenges as we navigated this transition, as employees and clients adjusted to new leadership. And I would face my own challenges, learning to trust my instincts again, rebuilding professional skills that had atrophied, balancing assertiveness with the genuine care for others that had always been my strength, even when it had been exploited. But for the first time in decades, I felt fully present in my own life. Not Robert's wife, not the children's mother, not the quiet woman in the background of someone else's success story, just Diana Mitchell, majority owner of Mitchell Media Group, architect of her own future. My phone buzzed again. Another text from Robert. "This isn't over, Diana. The board may have been swayed today, but they'll see reason eventually. Don't dismantle everything we've built over one emotional reaction to our personal situation." I didn't respond immediately, taking time to sip my wine and consider his message. The old Diana would have been rattled by his confidence, might have second-guessed. Herself might have sought compromise to keep the peace, but the woman who had walked out of Sullivan's with a champagne bottle, who had faced down a boardroom full of skeptics, who had reclaimed her rightful place at the head of the table, that woman recognized Robert's message for what it was, the desperate bluster of a man who had lost control and couldn't accept it. Finally, I typed a response. "You're right about one thing, Robert. This isn't over. It's just beginning." I set my phone aside and turned my attention back to the lake, to the lights of Seattle twinkling in the distance, to the endless possibilities that stretched before me like the open water. For 40 years, I had been defined by my relationship to others, wife, mother, silent partner. Now, at 65, I was finally writing my own story, and I couldn't wait to see how it would unfold. The first week at the helm of Mitchell Media passed in a whirlwind of meetings, revelations, and adjustments. I established my office in what had been our rarely used conference space, a corner room with panoramic views of Elliott Bay. I intentionally avoided taking Robert's office, understanding the symbolism would be too heavy-handed and potentially alienating to employees who still respected him. Claire Davidson, our creative director, became my unofficial guide through the company I'd helped found but had grown distant from. A tall woman with prematurely silver hair and a perpetual cup of green tea in hand, she seemed to find genuine delight in bringing me up to speed. The industry has changed dramatically in the last 5 years, she explained as we walked through the creative department on my third morning. Traditional advertising is only about 40% of our business now. The rest is digital strategy, content creation, and influencer management. Influencer management? I asked, watching as a group of 20-somethings huddled around a monitor, debating the merits of different Instagram aesthetics. Claire smiled. Social media personalities with large followings, brands pay them to promote products, and we manage those relationships, develop the content strategy, track metrics. I nodded, absorbing this new reality. And we're good at this? We're getting there. Smaller agencies are more nimble, but we have resources they don't. The real challenge is integrating traditional and digital approaches effectively. As we continued our tour, employees regarded me with a mixture of curiosity and caution. I was simultaneously a familiar figure and a complete unknown. The founder's wife suddenly revealed as the majority owner, the quiet woman in the background now occupying the center stage. Mrs. Mitchell! A young man with round glasses and a bow tie approached us eagerly. I'm Devin from Analytics. I've been meaning to introduce myself. Diana, please, I corrected gently, shaking his outstretched hand. Diana, he repeated, beaming. I just wanted to say, what you did in the boardroom, standing up to Mr. Mitchell, total legend status. The younger staff, we're all inspired. Claire shot him a warning look, but I laughed, genuinely touched by his enthusiasm. Thank you, Devin. Though I hope my contributions going forward will be more substantive than boardroom drama. Oh, for sure. He backpedaled slightly. I just meant, it's cool to see someone shake things up. Especially someone who's been underestimated. As Devin hurried back to his desk, Claire sighed. Sorry about that. Not everyone has grasped the professional boundaries of this transition. It's refreshing, actually, I admitted. Better than the whispers behind my back. And there were whispers, of course. Robert might be physically absent from the office, having taken a temporary leave to consider his future role, but his presence lingered in the company culture, in the territorial protectiveness of certain executives, in the uncertainty of longtime employees who owed their careers to his patronage. By Friday afternoon, I felt both exhilarated and exhausted. I'd absorbed more information in 5 days than in the previous 5 years, exposed gaps in my knowledge while discovering that my instincts and business sense remained sharp. I'd won over some skeptics, raised concerns with others, and begun to formulate a clearer vision for Mitchell Media's future. I was reviewing a proposed digital strategy when my assistant, Eliza, knocked softly on my open door. Ms. Mitchell, your daughter is here to see you. Megan stood behind her, elegant in surgical scrubs, clearly having come straight from the hospital. At 38, she was at the peak of her career, respected pediatric surgeon, researcher, mother of twin boys. She'd inherited my dark hair and Robert's analytical mind, combining them into a formidable intelligence that had always made me proud. Mom, she said, stepping into my office as Eliza discreetly withdrew. Wow. Corner office with a view. You've moved up in the world. I rose to embrace her, inhaling the familiar scent of her shampoo, something herbal and expensive that Robert and I had given her last Christmas. This is a surprise. Is everything okay? I had a surgery cancel and thought I'd check on you. She pulled back, studying my face with the same careful assessment she likely gave her patients. You look different. Good different or concerning different? I asked, gesturing for her to sit on the small sofa by the window. Good different. More present somehow. She settled onto the sofa, her posture perfect, even in scrubs. I ran into Dad yesterday. I tensed slightly, returning to my desk chair. How is he? Angry, confused, staying at the Four Seasons until he finds a condo. She regarded me carefully. He asked if I would talk to you, encourage you to be reasonable. And will you? Megan's laugh was short and sharp, so like Robert's that it made my chest ache. I told him I didn't think reasonable was what any of us should be aiming for right now. Relief washed through me. From the moment Robert had announced our divorce, I'd worried about how our children would position themselves. Tyler had been unequivocally supportive, but Megan had always been closer to her father, more aligned with his pragmatic worldview. Thank you, I said simply. She shrugged, gazing out at the Seattle skyline. He's making it pretty easy to take sides, Mom. The whole secretary thing is such a cliché. And when I pressed him about the company, about why he never told us you were the majority owner, his explanations were weak, to say the least. I nodded, unsurprised. Robert has always excelled at rewriting history to suit his narrative. Like how he always said you chose to step back from the business because you preferred homemaking. Megan's tone was sardonic. I believe that approximately never. It wasn't entirely untrue, I said carefully. I did want to focus on you and Tyler. But the stepping back was more gradual, less voluntary than he portrayed. Important meetings scheduled during school pickup. Client dinners arranged when I had other commitments. My suggestions attributed to others until I stopped, offering them. Megan's expression darkened. Death by 1,000 cuts. Something like that? I gestured around the office. But that's in the past. I'm focused on the future now. I can see that. She studied the stacks of reports on my desk, the industry publications spread across the coffee table. How's it going? Being back in charge after all this time? Challenging, overwhelming, exhilarating. I smiled ruefully. I'm facing a steep learning curve on the digital side, but the core principles of good marketing haven't changed. Know your audience, craft authentic messages, measure what matters. Megan nodded, then hesitated before asking, and personally, how are you handling everything? It was a loaded question, encompassing the end of my 40-year marriage, the public humiliation of being left for a younger woman, the seismic shift in my professional identity. How was I handling it? I wasn't entirely sure myself. I'm taking it day by day, I said finally. Some moments I feel liberated, powerful, like I've finally broken free of constraints I didn't even recognize. Other times, I trailed off, searching for the right words. You miss him, Megan finished softly. Despite everything, you miss the life you had. I met her gaze, struck by her perceptiveness. Not him exactly, but the certainty, the routine, the comfort of knowing my place in the world, even if that place was more limited than I deserved. My daughter studied me for a long moment, then said something that caught me completely off guard. I've been wondering if I'm becoming like him. Like Robert? In what way? She gestured vaguely. Career-focused to the exclusion of everything else. Expecting Mark to handle the household, the kids, the emotional labor, while I get the professional accolades, taking credit for joint successes. She met my eyes directly. Using people, the way Dad used you. The vulnerability in her admission stunned me. Megan had always projected confidence bordering on invulnerability. To hear her express such self-doubt, such awareness of potential flaws, was unprecedented. Megan, I said carefully, the fact that you're asking these questions, that you're conscious of these patterns, already sets you apart from your father. Robert never questioned his right to center himself, to prioritize his ambitions above all else. But I do those things, she insisted. I missed Ethan's piano recital last month for a conference I didn't really need to attend. I snapped at Mark for not scheduling the boys' dental appointments when I know he's juggling their activities and his own work. You're human, I interrupted gently. Making mistakes doesn't make you like Robert. It's the pattern that matters, the willingness to recognize and correct course, the fundamental respect for others' contributions and autonomy. She fell silent, absorbing this. When did you get so wise, Mom? Around the time I stopped diminishing myself to make your father comfortable, I replied with a small smile. Turns out I had thoughts and opinions all along. Megan laughed, a genuine sound that lightened the tension. I like this version of you. I'm starting to like her too. After Megan left, promising to bring the twins for a visit soon, I returned to the reports on my desk with renewed focus. The conversation had solidified something I'd been contemplating all week. Mitchell Media needed structural changes that went beyond just my leadership. We needed to embody the values I was reclaiming in my personal life. Transparency, equity, respect for contributions regardless of title or tenure. By Monday morning, I had outlined a plan for the executive team, a restructuring that would flatten the hierarchy somewhat, creating more collaborative decision-making processes while clarifying accountability. I'd spent the weekend researching progressive approaches in similar agencies, consulting with Sarah Lancaster about the legal implications, and preparing myself for resistance. The executive conference room felt different with me at the head of the table. Not Robert's position, which had always been in the middle where he could dominate the conversation from all angles, but the traditional leadership position at the end, facing the door. 7 people filed in for the 9 a.m. meeting. Claire from Creative, Thomas Blackwell from Accounts, Maria Rodriguez from Client Services, James Wong from Digital, Vivian Parker from HR, David Levine from Finance, and Martin Coleman, our COO, who had been Robert's right hand for nearly 15 years. Martin was the one I watched most carefully as I outlined my proposals. In his mid-50s, impeccably dressed and politically savvy, he had navigated Mitchell Media's growth by aligning himself firmly with Robert's vision. His loyalty had been rewarded with substantial compensation and considerable autonomy. My restructuring would impact his fiefdom most directly. So, to summarize, I concluded after a 20-minute presentation, we'll be creating cross-functional teams for our major clients, implementing a more transparent salary structure, and revising the bonus system to reward collaboration rather than individual performance. Questions? Several, Martin said immediately, his tone carefully modulated to sound thoughtful rather than oppositional. These are significant changes to systems that have served us well for years. What evidence suggests they're necessary or beneficial? I'd anticipated this. Our client retention rate has dropped 8% in the last 2 years. Exit interviews indicate a culture of internal competition that inhibits our best collaborative work. And our diversity metrics at senior levels are well below industry standards, suggesting we're not effectively developing and retaining all our talent. Martin's expression revealed nothing, but I saw James and Maria exchange approving glances. They had both advocated for more diverse leadership in the past, only to be stymied by what Robert had called natural pipelines of talent. Implementation. Timeline? Thomas asked. Always practical. Phased over 6 months, beginning with the cross-functional teams. HR will develop revised compensation guidelines with external consultants to ensure we're aligned with industry best practices. Vivian nodded, clearly pleased to be leading this initiative. At 42, she was our newest executive, having joined Mitchell Media after a successful career at a much more progressive tech company. She'd been pushing for these changes since her arrival. Client reaction? This from Maria, whose relationships with our major accounts were legendary. We'll position it as an evolution that enhances their experience. More integrated service, deeper understanding of their business, continuity even when individual team members change. I looked around the table. Which is true. This isn't just organizational window dressing. Claire leaned forward. I love this direction. Creative has been pushing for more integration with digital for years. The silo approach is killing our best ideas. Martin cleared his throat. While I appreciate the enthusiasm, I have concerns about disrupting a successful model during a period of leadership transition. Clients value stability. These changes coming so soon after Robert's departure might create perception issues. And there it was, the subtle reminder that I was new, that Robert's vision had built the company, that change represented risk. I met Martin's gaze directly. I understand your concern, Martin. That's why client communication will be handled with particular care. But I would challenge the characterization of our current model as consistently successful. Our growth has plateaued over the past 18 months, while competitors with more integrated approaches have gained market share. David nodded, confirming my assessment with the authority of his financial oversight. The data supports Diana's point. We're not in trouble, but we're not thriving either. Martin wasn't ready to concede. Robert had plans to address these challenges through the Apex partnership, a larger organization with more resources, and a history of gutting acquired agencies, I interjected firmly. That option is off. The table, Martin, permanently. Mitchell Media will remain independent, with a renewed commitment to the values that built our reputation: creativity, client service, and respect for our people. The message was clear. Robert's plans were no longer the roadmap. My vision would guide us forward. Martin sat back slightly, reassessing the dynamics around the table. He was too shrewd to position himself in direct opposition to me, especially with the majority of the executive team clearly supportive of the proposed changes. Then I'll certainly do everything possible to ensure a successful transition, he said smoothly. The meeting continued for another hour, diving into implementation details, addressing concerns, and assigning next steps. By the time we adjourned, even Martin was contributing constructively. His initial resistance transformed into strategic input on managing client expectations during the transition. As the executives filed out, Claire lingered behind. That went better than expected, she observed. I thought Martin would be more resistant. He's calculating his options, I replied, gathering my notes. Martin always aligns with power. For 40 years that meant Robert. Now the equation has changed. Claire laughed. You've got his number. I've spent decades observing how power works in this company, even when I wasn't wielding it myself. I glanced at my watch. Speaking of power dynamics, I have a lunch meeting with Daphne Rivera. The former Rivera Communications CEO? Interesting choice. I smiled. I'm collecting perspectives from women who've navigated agency leadership, learning from their experiences, both positive and negative. Smart. Will you be back for the Westridge presentation this afternoon? I nodded. Wouldn't miss it. It's our first major client meeting since the transition was announced. The Westridge account had been Robert's pride and joy, a luxury hotel conglomerate that had been with Mitchell Media for over a decade. Their annual marketing budget exceeded $15 million, and their CEO, Lawrence Westridge, had been Robert's golfing partner for years. If any client relationship would be affected by the leadership change, it would be Westridge. My lunch with Daphne Rivera proved enlightening. Over seafood at a waterfront restaurant far from Mitchell Media's usual haunts, she shared her experience of leading, and eventually losing, Rivera Communications. My mistake was trusting that excellence would speak for itself, she said, deftly separating crab meat from its shell. I focused on the work, on building the best creative team, on delivering results. I didn't invest enough in relationships with the money people, the power brokers. Like Apex, I suggested. She nodded grimly. They approached my ex-husband first. Carlos was only a 20% owner. but he had connections Apex valued. They essentially used him to get to me, offering him guarantees they never intended to honor. And now? Carlos has a meaningless title, a nice office, and no actual authority. Half our staff was laid off in the first 6 months. Our best creatives left for other agencies. The Rivera Communications that exists today shares nothing but a name with the agency I built. She set down her fork, meeting my gaze directly. You were smart to block the acquisition, Diana. Smarter still to reclaim your power before it was too late. It wasn't strategy, I admitted. It was survival. Daphne's laugh was sharp. Isn't it always? The myth that women separate emotions from business decisions is just that, a myth. The best business leaders I know, regardless of gender, are driven by deeply personal motivations. The difference is that men are taught to disguise theirs as strategic vision, while women are told our personal stakes make us less objective. I considered this, recognizing the truth in her observation. My actions had indeed been motivated by personal factors, betrayal, anger, self-preservation, but the resulting business decisions were no less sound for their emotional origins. What would you do differently? I asked. If you could go back to when you were first approached by Apex? Daphne didn't hesitate. I would have secured key staff with contracts that protected them in case of acquisition. I would have diversified our client base away from vulnerable industries. I would have built stronger alliances with other independent agencies. She sipped her water thoughtfully. And I would have been more transparent with my team about the pressures we were facing. Silence doesn't protect people. It leaves them unprepared. I absorbed this advice, recognizing its relevance to the challenges ahead. Martin wasn't the only one in Mitchell Media who might resist my leadership or remain loyal to Robert's vision. The Westridge account wasn't the only client relationship built on personal connections that might now be strained. Thank you for your candor, I said as we finished our meal. Would you consider consulting with us as we navigate this transition? Your experience would be invaluable. Daphne's smile was genuine. I thought you'd never ask. The non-compete in my Apex agreement expired 3 months ago. I've been itching to get back in the game, even if only as an advisor. We parted with plans to meet the following week, Daphne promising to review our restructuring proposal and offer recommendations based on her experience. As I drove back to the office, I felt a growing confidence in my ability to lead Mitchell Media through this transformation. Not because I had all the answers, but because I was willing to seek wisdom from others who had walked similar paths. The Westridge presentation was scheduled for 3 p.m. in our largest conference room. As I walked through the office toward the meeting, I noticed an unusual level of activity. People hurrying between departments, hushed conversations breaking off. As I passed, a tangible buzz of anticipation. Eliza intercepted me before I could reach the conference room. Ms. Mitchell, there's been a development with the Westridge meeting. Problem with the presentation? No, the presentation is ready. It's just... She hesitated. Mr. Mitchell is here, with Mr. Westridge. I stilled, absorbing this information. Robert came to the office for the Westridge meeting? She nodded. They arrived together about 20 minutes ago. The executive team is with them in the main conference room. This was a calculated move on Robert's part, bringing Lawrence Westridge to Mitchell Media without warning, positioning himself as the essential relationship holder, undermining my authority with our most significant client. The message was clear. I might control the company legally, but Robert controlled the relationships that kept it profitable. Thank you, Eliza, I said calmly, though my heart was racing. Please let Claire know I'll be joining the meeting momentarily. In the restroom, I took 60 seconds to compose myself, studying my reflection in the mirror. I looked professional. In a navy dress and jacket, my silver-streaked dark hair pulled back in a simple chignon, minimal makeup emphasizing my best features. But was I ready to face Robert in a professional setting? To navigate a high-stakes client interaction with my estranged husband watching for any sign of weakness? I had to be. Taking a deep breath, I straightened my shoulders and headed for the conference room. The scene that greeted me was exactly as I had imagined. Robert seated at the center of the table, Lawrence Westridge beside him, both men laughing comfortably while the Mitchell media team arranged themselves around them. Claire caught my eye as I entered, her expression conveying both warning and support. "Diana," Robert said smoothly, standing as if this were his home and I the visitor. "Lawrence and I were just catching up. I hope you don't mind my joining this meeting, given my long relationship with Westridge Hotels." Lawrence Westridge stood as well, extending his hand. A distinguished man in his early 70s with the perpetual tan of the wealthy, he had always treated me with the particular courtesy reserved for a colleague's spouse, polite but dismissive. "Mrs. Mitchell," he said, emphasizing my marital title despite the divorce proceedings Robert had initiated. "Quite a surprise, these developments. Robert's been filling me in." I shook his hand firmly. "It's Ms. Mitchell, actually, or Diana, if you prefer. And yes, recent weeks have brought significant changes, though the quality of service Westridge Hotels receives from Mitchell Media remains our highest priority." Taking control of the room, I moved to the head of the table. "Shall we begin? The presentation? I believe we have an exciting new direction to share for the Westridge winter campaign." Robert's expression tightened almost imperceptibly, recognizing my refusal to be sidelined. Lawrence glanced between us, reassessing the dynamic he had walked into. For the next 45 minutes, Claire and James led a brilliant presentation of the proposed winter campaign, an integrated approach that combined traditional luxury marketing with innovative digital experiences for Westridge guests. I contributed strategic insights at key moments, demonstrating my understanding of both the hospitality industry and the Westridge brand specifically. Lawrence asked thoughtful questions, gradually directing them to me rather than Robert as the meeting progressed. By the conclusion, it was clear that the transition in leadership had not compromised the quality of our work. If anything, the fresh perspective had enhanced it. "Impressive," Lawrence said as Claire wrapped up the final slides. "Different from your usual approach, Robert, but I see the potential, especially with the younger luxury market we've been trying to capture." Robert nodded tightly. Mitchell Media has always evolved with the times, though I must give credit where it's due. Diana has clearly brought new energy to the creative process. The backhanded compliment hung in the air. I smiled pleasantly, refusing to acknowledge the implication that my contribution was merely energy rather than substance. "Mitchell Media's strength has always been our collaborative approach," I replied. "Robert built an exceptional team over the years. As chairwoman, my role is to ensure that team continues to deliver outstanding results for valued clients like Westridge." Lawrence studied me with newfound interest. "I look forward to working with you, Diana. Perhaps we could schedule a proper meeting to discuss the Westridge account more broadly?" Robert has always been my primary contact, but given the circumstances, "I would welcome that," I said smoothly. "My assistant will reach out to your office to find a convenient time." Robert's jaw tightened further, but he maintained his composure. "Lawrence, shall we head to the club? Our tea time is in an hour." As they prepared to leave, Robert paused by my chair. "A word in private before I go?" I nodded, following him to a small meeting room adjacent to the conference area. Once the door closed behind us, his carefully maintained facade cracked. "What exactly do you think you're doing?" he demanded, voice low but intense. "Running my company," I replied calmly. "Serving our clients, leading our team. You're dismantling everything I've built. The restructuring proposal, the rejection of the Apex deal, now inserting yourself into client relationships that have been mine for decades." Correction. I'm protecting what we built together from your attempts to cash out at the expense of our employees and our legacy. I met his gaze steadily. And client relationships belong to the agency, Robert, not to individuals. That's basic. Business principle? He scoffed. Lawrence Westridge would pull his account in a heartbeat if I suggested it. Is that why you brought him here without notice? To threaten me with client defection? Robert had the grace to look slightly abashed, though he quickly recovered. I brought him here because he asked to see me, and this is where I've worked for 40 years. Worked, yes. Past tense. You're on leave, remember? Considering your future role. I checked my watch pointedly. Your golf game is waiting, and I have a company to run. As I turned to leave, Robert spoke again, his tone softer. Diana, this isn't what I wanted. The divorce, yes, but not. This animosity, this public battle. We built something meaningful together. Can't we find a way forward that preserves that, even as our personal relationship changes? I paused at the door, considering his words. Was there sincerity in them, or just another manipulation? After 40 years, I should have been able to tell the difference, yet I found myself uncertain. I'm open to discussion about your future role with Mitchell Media, I said finally, but it will be on terms that respect my position as majority owner and that protect the company's independence and culture. If you're genuinely interested in that conversation, have your lawyer contact Sarah Lancaster to arrange a meeting. I left him standing there, returning to the conference room where the team was debriefing the Westridge presentation. As I settled into my chair, Claire gave me a questioning look. Everything okay? She asked quietly. I nodded, a small smile forming. Better than okay. For the first time in 40 years, I'm exactly where I belong. 6 months transformed Mitchell Media in ways few could have anticipated. Our restructuring had progressed from organizational charts to lived reality, with cross-functional teams delivering integrated campaigns that brought in 3 major new clients. The company culture had evolved, still maintaining the excellence Robert had instilled but now infused with a collaborative spirit that encouraged innovation across departments. Most remarkably, we'd retained every key client through the transition, including Westridge Hotels, whose CEO Lawrence had become one of my most vocal supporters after our private strategy meeting. On a crisp October morning, I arrived at the YI office earlier than usual. The quarterly financial review was scheduled for that afternoon, and I wanted time to prepare alone, without the constant flow of questions and decisions that filled my typical day. Dawn was just breaking over Elliott Bay as I settled at my desk, the Seattle skyline gradually emerging from darkness into a palette of pinks and golds. Tea? Claire appeared in my doorway, 2 steaming mugs in hand. Like me, she was often in the office before sunrise, finding creative clarity in the quiet hours. You're a lifesaver, I said gratefully, accepting the fragrant chai she preferred over coffee. Reviewing the numbers for today? Actually, I came to show you something else. She set her mug down and handed me a sleek magazine. Hot off the press, page 42. I opened to the indicated page and felt my breath catch. There, in striking layout, was a feature article titled The Renaissance of Mitchell Media. How Diana Mitchell reclaimed her company and reinvented an industry leader. Advertising Age did a profile on us? I skimmed the first paragraph, noting the glowing description of our recent campaign for an ecotourism client. Claire smiled, settling into the chair across from my desk. On you specifically. They interviewed half the executive team, but the focus is your leadership journey. The writer was particularly interested in how you've balanced honoring the company's legacy while implementing progressive changes. I continued reading, emotions swirling as I absorbed the professional recognition that had eluded me for decades. The article portrayed me not as Robert's wife who had suddenly inherited power, but as a savvy founder who had reclaimed her rightful place after years in the background. It detailed the structural changes we'd implemented, the creative renaissance under my leadership, the financial results that validated my vision. Most surprising was a quote from Martin Coleman, our COO, who had been Robert's staunchest ally. "Diana Mitchell brings a perspective we didn't know we needed. She sees both the forest and the trees, the big picture strategy and the human details that ultimately determine success or failure. The agency is thriving under her leadership in ways it simply wasn't before." Martin said this? I looked up at Claire in disbelief. "Voluntarily?" She laughed. "Shocking, isn't it? But authentic. He's become one of your biggest advocates, especially with the board. The quarterly numbers helped, of course. Nothing convinces skeptics like 15% revenue growth." I set the magazine aside, still processing this public validation of my leadership. "Does Robert know about this article?" "If he doesn't, he will soon. It's already generating buzz online." Claire's expression grew more serious. "Speaking of Robert, there's a rumor he's launching a consulting practice specializing in agency acquisitions, supposedly partnering with Apex Digital to identify potential targets." The news didn't surprise me. Robert was incapable of true retirement, and his expertise in the agency world was undeniable, even if his methods had grown outdated. Still, the partnership with Apex, the very company I'd protected Mitchell Media from, felt pointed, personal. "Good for him," I said simply. "Everyone needs purpose." Claire studied me over the rim of her mug. "You're not concerned? About Robert advising Apex on acquisitions? No. He's free to leverage his expertise however he chooses, as long as it doesn't violate the terms of our settlement." The divorce had been finalized 3 months earlier, with surprisingly little acrimony once Robert accepted the reality of my ownership stake. He'd received a generous financial package in exchange for relinquishing any claims to Mitchell Media, along with our vacation home in the San Juan Islands and several investment properties. "And you're really okay with him marrying Natalie next month?" Claire asked, voicing the question many had been too cautious to raise directly. I considered this carefully. The announcement of Robert and Natalie's engagement had come just weeks after our divorce was finalized, confirming what many had suspected, that their relationship had been developing for quite some time before our anniversary dinner revelation. "I find I'm genuinely indifferent," I said, realizing the truth of it as I spoke. 40 years is a long time to share a life with someone, but the woman getting married next month isn't marrying the man I knew. She's marrying the person he's become, for better or worse. That's remarkably enlightened of you. I shrugged, turning to gaze out at the brightening skyline. Not enlightenment, just clarity. I spent too many years caring deeply about Robert's choices, his opinions, his approval. It's liberating to simply not. Our conversation shifted to the day's agenda, but Claire's questions lingered in my mind as I prepared for the financial review. Had I truly reached indifference regarding Robert's new life, or was I simply protecting myself from acknowledging lingering hurt? The answer revealed itself gradually throughout the day, in my steady focus during meetings, in authentic laughter shared with colleagues over lunch, in the absence of that hollow ache that had once accompanied thoughts of my failed marriage. By late afternoon, as the executive team gathered for the quarterly review, I realized a fundamental truth. Happiness wasn't something that had returned to me after loss, but something I had created through choice. Every decision over the past 6 months, from reclaiming my company to redecorating my home, from reconnecting with old friends to developing new interests, had been an intentional step toward the life I wanted, not a reaction to the life I had lost. The financial review exceeded even our optimistic projections. Revenue was up 15% year over year, with notable growth in our digital services and creative content divisions. Client retention had improved from 84 to 92%, while employee satisfaction scores had risen dramatically across all departments. Even Martin, typically conservative in his assessments, acknowledged that the restructuring had yielded results beyond his expectations. The cross-functional, Teams have eliminated the silos that were slowing us down, he noted, pointing to performance metrics on his presentation. Clients are reporting higher satisfaction with our responsiveness and integrated solutions. And talent acquisition has never been stronger, Vivian added from HR. We've secured 3 creative directors from top agencies in the last quarter, alone. Word is spreading that Mitchell Media is the place to be. As the team continued sharing successes from their respective areas, I felt a profound sense of vindication. The changes I'd implemented weren't just working. They were transforming Mitchell Media into the company it should have been all along. Not Robert's company, not solely my company, but a collaborative enterprise where individual talents could flourish within a culture of mutual respect and shared purpose. After the meeting concluded, I remained in the conference room alone, savoring the moment. Through the glass walls, I could see the office humming with activity. Creatives gathered around a prototype, account managers on calls with clients. The digital team clustered near a wall of monitors displaying analytics. My phone chimed with a text from Tyler. "Dinner tonight to celebrate your magazine feature? Megan's in if you are." I smiled, typing back my acceptance. My relationship with both children had deepened over these months of transition, evolving from the traditional mother-child dynamic into something richer, a connection between adults who genuinely enjoyed each other's company and respected each other's journey. As I gathered my notes from the meeting, Eliza appeared in the doorway. "Ms. Mitchell, there's someone here to see you. She doesn't have an appointment, but she's quite insistent." "Who is it?" Eliza hesitated, clearly uncomfortable. "Natalie Chen." The name hung in the air between us. My husband's secretary, his fiancée, the woman who had sat beside him at our anniversary dinner as he announced the end of our marriage. "Send her in," I said after a moment's consideration. Natalie entered the conference room with the same poise I remembered from that night at Le Château, though her confident facade seemed slightly diminished. She wore a sleek gray dress that emphasized her youth and slender frame, her dark hair styled in a sophisticated bob that hadn't been her signature when she worked at Mitchell Media. "Mrs. Mitchell," she began, then caught herself. "Ms. Mitchell, thank you for seeing me without an appointment." "Diana is fine," I replied, gesturing for her to sit. "What can I do for you, Natalie?" She settled into a chair across from me, her hands clasped tightly on the table between us. "I wanted to speak with you directly, without Robert's knowledge, about the wedding." "I'm afraid I'm not involved in your wedding planning," I said, mildly uncertain where this conversation was heading. "No, of course not." She flushed slightly. "What I mean is, I wanted to make sure you heard directly from me that I never intended things to happen this way. Robert and I, it wasn't some calculated plan to hurt you." I studied her. This young woman who had stepped into the life I had occupied for 4 decades. Her apparent need for my understanding, perhaps even my absolution, was unexpected. "Natalie," I said carefully, "your relationship with Robert really isn't my concern anymore. We're divorced. He's free to marry whomever he chooses." "I know, legally, but—" She hesitated, seemingly searching for words. "The article about you in Advertising Age, it's making waves. People are reaching out to Robert, questioning his version of events. Some clients are reconsidering their relationship with his new consulting practice. And I thought maybe if you... And I could clear the air if you could tell people you don't harbor resentment." "Ah. So this wasn't about seeking forgiveness for moral reasons, but managing public relations. The revelation should have angered me, yet I found myself more amused than offended." "Let me understand," I said, keeping my tone neutral. "You'd like me to publicly endorse my ex-husband's relationship with his former secretary, the relationship that was revealed to me during our anniversary dinner, to help salvage his professional reputation?" Put so bluntly, the request sounded absurd even to Natalie, who winced visibly. when you put it that way. How else would you put it? She sighed, shoulders slumping slightly. I don't know. This isn't how I pictured my life unfolding. Being seen as the other woman, the secretary who broke up a 40-year marriage. Having people whisper when we enter restaurants. Getting uninvited from industry events because the hosts are loyal to you. For the first time, I glimpsed the reality of Natalie's position. Not just the glamorous younger woman who had captured a wealthy older man, but someone navigating the complex social consequences of choices made in the heat of infatuation. Despite myself, I felt a flicker of sympathy. The narrative will evolve over time, I said, softening slightly. People have short memories, especially when it comes to others' personal lives. Focus on building your marriage on honest ground, not on managing external perceptions. Natalie looked up, surprise evident in her expression. That's not the response I expected. What did you expect? Anger, bitterness. You have every right to hate me. I considered this, reflecting on the journey that had brought me to this moment, sitting across from my ex-husband's fiancée in the conference room of the company I now openly led, feeling not rage or despair, but a profound sense of my own wholeness. Hate requires energy I'd rather invest elsewhere, I said finally. What happened between you, Robert, and me led me here. To reclaiming my company, to rediscovering myself, to building a life that's authentically mine. I can't regret the path that brought me to this place, even if I wouldn't have chosen the particular circumstances. Natalie absorbed this, her expression thoughtful. You've changed. From when I worked here, I mean. You were always so accommodating, self-effacing, in the background? She nodded. Robert used to say you preferred it that way, that you didn't have the temperament for business leadership. I laughed softly, unsurprised by this revelation. Robert saw what he wanted to see. We all did, for a very long time. An awkward silence settled between us, filled with unspoken acknowledgments. Of harm caused, of realities accepted, of lives irrevocably altered by choices made in secret and revealed in public. I should go, Natalie said finally, rising from her chair. Thank you for seeing me, and for being kind when you didn't have to be. Natalie, I called as she reached the door. One piece of advice if you're open to it? She turned, waiting. Don't make yourself smaller to accommodate Robert's need to be the center of the narrative. I did that for 40 years. It serves neither of you in the end. After she left, I remained in the conference room, processing the unexpected encounter. There was a symmetry to it. Meeting Natalie here in the heart of Mitchell Media, the company I'd reclaimed despite Robert's attempts to sideline me. Both of us so different from who we had been at that anniversary dinner 6 months earlier. My phone buzzed with a reminder, dinner with Tyler and Megan in 2 hours. Just enough time to wrap up a few items and change before meeting my children at Altura, the Italian restaurant that had become our favorite spot for family celebrations. As I walked through the office toward the elevator, employees nodded in greeting, some stopping to offer quick updates or ask brief questions. This easy interaction, this sense of belonging and respect, still felt novel after decades of being treated as peripheral to the company's operations. In the parking garage, I passed a familiar silver Jaguar pulling into a visitor space, Robert's car. He emerged as I approached, looking startled to see me. Diana, he said, his tone carefully neutral. I was just coming to collect some personal items from my old office. Your assistant said it would be a convenient time. Of course. I nodded, continuing toward my own car. Eliza will show you where we've stored your things. He hesitated, then fell into step beside me. I just passed Natalie in the lobby. She mentioned she'd spoken with you. We had a brief conversation, yes. About the wedding. I stopped, turning to face him directly. Robert, your wedding plans are your own concern. Natalie seemed worried about public perception affecting your new consulting venture. I assured her that narratives evolve over time. He studied me, clearly trying to gauge my sincerity. At 68, he remained handsome in a distinguished way, though I noted new lines around his eyes, a slight softening of his once athletic frame. "You seem different," he said finally. "At peace." "I am." "I saw the Advertising Age article." He shifted uncomfortably. "It was complimentary to you and the company. It reflected the reality of what's happening at Mitchell Media," I replied simply. "Under your leadership," he acknowledged, the words seemingly difficult for him. "The financial results are impressive. Lawrence Westridge mentioned the new campaign has exceeded their expectations." "The team did exceptional work," I said, deflecting the personal credit in a habit I was still working to break. Then catching myself. And yes, my strategic direction contributed significantly to its success. Robert's eyebrows rose slightly at this self-acknowledgement, so contrary to my decades of self-effacement. "Confidence suits you," he observed, something unidentifiable flickering in his eyes. Regret, perhaps, or simple recognition of what had always been there beneath the accommodating exterior he had preferred. "Thank you. If you'll excuse me, I'm meeting Tyler and Megan for dinner." I stepped past him toward my car, then paused. "Oh, and Robert, congratulations on your engagement. I hope you and Natalie find happiness together." I meant it, I realized as I drove toward home, not out of residual affection or noble forgiveness, but from the genuine understanding that Robert's choices were no longer entwined with my well-being. His happiness or unhappiness with Natalie would unfold according to their own dynamics, just as my life would continue evolving along the path I was creating. At home, I changed into a deep emerald dress I'd purchased during a weekend shopping trip with Megan, a color Robert had always discouraged, claiming it was too bold for my delicate coloring. The woman in the mirror looked back at me with clear eyes and an easy smile, silver strands threading through dark hair I no longer colored to Robert's preference, laugh lines I no longer tried to conceal with expensive creams. My phone chimed, with a text from an unfamiliar number. Opening it, I found a message from Daphne Rivera. "Heading your way next week for the conference. Dinner Tuesday. Bringing Patricia from Dyeworth Agency. She's fighting off Apex advances and needs your wisdom." I smiled, typing back a quick acceptance. The informal alliance of women agency leaders Daphne and I had begun building had grown organically over recent months, creating a network of support and strategic collaboration that was strengthening independent agencies across the region. As I gathered my purse and keys, my gaze fell on the framed Advertising Age article Claire had given me that morning, now prominently displayed on my entryway table. The headline captured in a single phrase the journey of the past 6 months. The Renaissance of Mitchell Media. Renaissance, rebirth. The perfect word for what had transpired, not just for the company but for me personally. At 65, when many were contemplating retirement, I had experienced a profound awakening, a rediscovery of capabilities long dormant but never truly lost. Altura was bustling when I arrived, the warm lighting and intimate layout creating an atmosphere of sophisticated comfort. Tyler spotted me first, rising from the corner table he'd secured, Megan already seated with a glass of Prosecco in hand. "Mom," he greeted me with a warm embrace, "the woman of the hour." "Hardly," I demurred, though secretly pleased by the recognition. "Just doing my job." Which involves completely reinventing a major agency, generating double-digit growth, and landing a feature in Advertising Age, Megan countered, standing to kiss my cheek. "Totally routine." We settled at the table, ordering a bottle of Barolo to share and discussing the seasonal tasting menu. The easy conversation with my adult children still felt like a gift. This new dynamic where they saw me not just as their mother, but as a woman with her own accomplishments, her own identity beyond the family roles that had once defined me. "So," Tyler said once we'd ordered, We have news. Both of you? I glanced between them, curious. Megan nodded, a smile playing at her lips. Tyler's going first. My son straightened slightly, his expression a mixture of excitement and nervousness I hadn't seen since he was a teenager. I'm leaving the investment firm, starting my own practice focusing on sustainable investment portfolios for mid-market companies. Tyler, that's wonderful, I said, genuinely pleased. He had been increasingly frustrated with his firm's resistance to environmental and social governance considerations in investment decisions. There's more, he continued. I'd like to offer Mitchell Media as my first client to help realign your investment portfolio with your corporate values. The significance of this wasn't lost on me. Throughout his career, Tyler had deliberately maintained professional distance from Mitchell Media, avoiding the shadow of his father's influence. That he now sought to connect our professional worlds represented a profound shift in how he viewed both the company and my leadership of it. I'd be honored, I said simply, squeezing his hand across the table. My turn, Megan interjected, her excitement palpable. I've been offered the position of Chief of Pediatric Surgery at Seattle Children's. Megan, that's incredible. The prestigious role was a testament to her exceptional surgical skills and leadership capacity. When would you start? January, which means I'll be stepping back from full-time surgery to take on more administrative responsibilities. She took a sip of her Prosecco, then added, and I've asked Mark to reduce his workload as well, so we can share family responsibilities more equitably. This was perhaps the most significant revelation of all. Megan had always prioritized her surgical career above all else, often relying on her husband to manage their household and children's needs while she pursued professional advancement, a dynamic uncomfortably reminiscent of my relationship with Robert. That sounds like a thoughtful balance, I said carefully. How does Mark feel about it? Relieved, honestly. He's been wanting to expand his landscape architecture practice but felt he couldn't with his current family workload. She met my gaze directly. Watching you these past months, reclaiming your power, but doing it with empathy and without sacrificing relationships, it made me rethink how I've been approaching my marriage, my parenting. Success doesn't have to come at someone else's expense. Her words touched me deeply, suggesting that my journey had influenced my daughter in ways I hadn't anticipated. The patterns I'd broken weren't just reshaping my life, but potentially changing the legacy I passed to my children. I'm proud of you both, I said, raising my glass. To new beginnings. As we clinked glasses, I felt a profound sense of completion. Not of my journey, which continued to unfold in unexpected ways, but of the circle that had begun that night at Le Château, when Robert had shattered the life I thought I knew, and inadvertently set me on the path to discovering the life I was meant to live. The server arrived with our first course, a delicate crudo of local seafood artfully arranged on handmade pottery. As we savored the dish, conversation flowed to lighter topics. Tyler's recent sailing trip, Megan's twins starting kindergarten, my tentative plans to join a watercolor class recommended by Claire. Have you heard from Dad about the wedding? Tyler asked eventually, the question gentle but direct. Not directly, I replied, though Natalie came to see me today. I shared the essence of our conversation, omitting the parts about Robert's consulting business struggling due to the Advertising Age article. Some loyalties, it seemed, remained intact despite everything. That took nerve, Megan observed. Coming to ask for your public blessing, essentially. I shrugged. She's young, still learning that life isn't as easily managed as a corporate image campaign. Will you say something? Publicly, I mean, about being fine with their marriage? Tyler asked. I considered this as I sipped my wine. No, I don't think so. Not because I harbor ill will, but because my approval or disapproval isn't relevant to their relationship. They'll succeed or fail based on their own dynamic, not on my blessing or its absence. Megan nodded thoughtfully. That's surprisingly wise, Mom. Surprisingly? I arched an eyebrow in mock offense. She laughed. You know what I mean. You've always been intelligent, but this new perspective, this clarity about boundaries and relationships, it's different. It's hard-won, I acknowledged. 40 years of subordinating my needs taught me exactly what I don't want from the next chapter of my life. And what do you want? Tyler asked, his expression genuinely curious. Beyond Mitchell Media's success? The question caught me by surprise, not because it was intrusive, but because I realized I hadn't explicitly articulated my personal aspirations beyond reclaiming my professional identity. What did I want from life at 65, newly divorced, with a successful company and adult children thriving in their own lives? I want to experience everything I deferred, I said finally. Travel without accommodating someone else's preferences. Learn new skills without worrying about outshining anyone. Build friendships based on mutual interests rather than social obligation. I smiled, remembering my conversation with Natalie earlier. I want to take up space unapologetically, to live without constantly calculating the impact of my choices on someone else's ego. Any room in that vision for romance? Megan asked, a teasing lilt in her voice. I haven't ruled it out, I admitted. But it's not a priority. If someone complements the life I'm building, wonderful. If not, I'm complete on my own. The truth of this statement resonated deeply as I spoke it. After decades of believing, my value was derived from my relationship with Robert, from supporting his ambitions and maintaining his home. I had discovered the profound pleasure of self-sufficiency, not just financially, but emotionally and spiritually as well. Our dinner extended late into the evening, the conversation flowing easily from professional achievements to personal reflections to lighthearted family stories. As we parted outside the restaurant, Tyler hugged me tightly, whispering, "I'm so proud of you, Mom. Dad never saw what you were capable of, but we always did." Driving home along the darkened streets of Seattle, lights reflecting off the wet pavement after a brief evening shower, I found myself filled with an unexpected sense of anticipation. Not for any specific event or achievement, but for the simple joy of waking up tomorrow to continue the life I was creating. A life that had been within my grasp all along, waiting only for me to claim it. At home, I kicked off my heels and poured a small glass of the scotch I'd recently discovered I enjoyed, though Robert had always insisted it was too strong for my palate. Carrying it out to the deck overlooking Lake Washington, I settled into a comfortable chair to watch the moonlight dancing across the gentle waves. My phone buzzed with a final text of the day, from Claire, sending a link to another article about Mitchell Media's transformation, this one in the Seattle Business Journal. "They're calling it the Mitchell Renaissance," she wrote. "But those of us on the inside know the truth. It's always been your company. We're just finally seeing it through your eyes." I smiled, setting the phone aside without responding. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities, new moments to assert the truth I had too long denied. That I was not merely an accessory to someone else's success story, but the author of my own. The lake shimmered in the moonlight, constant, yet ever-changing, much like the woman who now sat alone but not lonely, reflecting on the unexpected gift hidden within betrayal, the chance to finally, fully become herself. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.